Vanessa Blake strutted into the sleek glass lobby of Cole Global, heels clicking against the polished marble like a countdown. New job, fresh start, time to rewrite her story. She smoothed her blouse, flashed her signature smile at her own reflection, and whispered under her breath, "Fake it till you make it, babe." The receptionist directed her to the orientation room on the 25th floor. As the elevator ascended, Vanessa pulled out her compact mirror, checking her lipstick for the 10th time. Classic red, power color. No one had to know she'd cried off half her mascara in the bathroom just that morning. Doors slid open, revealing a conference room of eager new hires, and the panoramic view of a city Vanessa once conquered in stilettos and designer dreams. She was still adjusting her smile when the glass door opened behind her, and a voice, calm, confident, too familiar, filled the room. "Welcome to your first day," Ethan Cole said, his presence electrifying the air. "Hope you're ready to take orders from the nobody you left behind." The world tilted under Vanessa's feet. Ethan stood at the head of the room, every inch of him curated to intimidate. Dark tailored suit, black shirt, no tie, just expensive confidence dripping from him like cologne. The boy who once sat on the edge of her college bed, stammering through his career plans, was now the man who owned the building they stood in. Vanessa's perfectly glossed lips parted in disbelief, but no words came. Ethan didn't pause to savor her reaction. That would have been too easy. He moved on, effortlessly commanding the room's attention, weaving corporate goals into his personal power play. "Our standard is excellence. Our reputation? Ruthless. If you're here, it means someone thought you were cutthroat enough to survive. Prove them right." His gaze swept the room, cool and clinical, until it landed on Vanessa. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Memory, amusement, maybe even satisfaction. Then, just like that, it was gone. "Orientation packets are in front of you. First project deadlines hit next Friday. Fail once, you're warned. Fail twice, you're gone. Any questions?" Ethan's voice was sharp, designed to cut. Vanessa couldn't breathe, let alone raise her hand. The last time she'd seen him, she'd been leaning against her sorority house doorway, tossing her hair and her goodbye over her shoulder. "You'll never make it, Ethan. You're just forgettable." "Forgettable, right." "Dismissed," Ethan said, and just as quickly as he'd entered her life again, he was gone, leaving only silence and Vanessa's own pulse pounding in her ears. She dropped into her chair, fingers trembling against the orientation packet with his name embossed at the top. CEO, Ethan Cole. Her past had just become her present, and judging by the wicked gleam in his eye, Ethan had no intention of letting her forget a single moment of it. Vanessa's manicured fingers tapped against the cold surface of her desk, her mind drifting back to the last time she'd seen Ethan Cole. Back then, his suits came from clearance racks, his haircut was whatever the cheapest barber offered, and his confidence, well, it barely existed. He was sweet in a boy-next-door way, ambitious but unsure of how to mold that hunger into anything tangible. They met freshman year in an economics seminar Vanessa barely paid attention to. Ethan, on the other hand, took notes like his life depended on it. He wasn't her usual type, not a legacy kid, not drowning in generational wealth. But there was something about him. He made her laugh. He listened, really listened, in a way the entitled frat boys never did. For a while, they were inseparable. Study dates turned into late-night drives. Coffee runs became stolen kisses in the back of the library. Vanessa would tease him for his thrift store shoes, and Ethan would just smile, because in his mind, one day he'd buy her anything she wanted. Then came the party. Senior year. Vanessa, with a champagne flute in hand, surrounded by the glittering crowd she belonged to. Ethan stood a few feet away, visibly out of place in his ill-fitted blazer. Someone asked how they even ended up together, and Vanessa, drunk on attention and vodka, laughed. "He's sweet," she'd said, "but let's be real, a guy like Ethan, he's forgettable." She didn't even notice him leave. She didn't realize those words hit harder than any slap. By the time she sobered up, he was gone, dropped off the social radar, vanished from her orbit like he never existed. Vanessa moved on. At least, that's what she told herself. She graduated, dated guys with trust funds and jawlines carved by personal trainers, but none of them wrote her poems on coffee sleeves. None of them looked at her like she was everything. And Ethan? Ethan disappeared into the city's underbelly, hustling like a man possessed. He worked 3 jobs: intern by day, bartender by night, freelance analyst on weekends. Each rejection fueled him, each door slammed in his face sharpened his edge. He learned the language of power, not just business, but how to command a room, how to weaponize silence, how to make people crave his approval. By 23, he had launched his first startup. By 24, he sold it for 7 figures. Now, at 26, Ethan Cole wasn't just successful, he was feared. Vanessa knew none of this as she sat frozen at her desk. She hadn't tracked his rise, hadn't seen the headlines or the profiles in Forbes 30 Under 30. Her own world had been crumbling. Bad investments, fake friends, a rich boyfriend who vanished when his Ponzi scheme collapsed, leaving her with debt collectors and a Prada addiction she couldn't fund. And now fate, cruel poetic fate, had placed her directly under Ethan's thumb. A knock at her glass office door made her jump. Ethan stood there, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a small black notebook. His infamous revenge diary, though she didn't know that yet. Conference room. Now, his voice was calm, but Vanessa felt it wrap around her throat like silk turning to steel. As they walked, she stole glances at him. Everything about him had sharpened. The jawline, the stride, even the way his watch caught the light. This wasn't Ethan. This was a man forged in fire, a king who'd built his throne from the ashes of every insult, every dismissal, including hers. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving them alone in the mirrored box. Vanessa opened her mouth to say something, to apologize, to explain, to charm her way out, but Ethan didn't even look at her. The silence was deafening, and Vanessa realized Ethan might have once been forgettable, but now he was unforgettable. Vanessa's heels clicked unevenly against the polished floor as she trailed behind Ethan toward the conference room. Her stomach knotted tighter with each step. Every door they passed seemed to whisper, "What are you doing here?" And every passing employee's glance felt like a spotlight searing into her back. It was one thing to see Ethan Cole from a distance, to process in shocked silence how the nobody she once dismissed had risen so high. It was something else entirely to follow him into a room where she was nothing and he was everything. The conference room was all glass and steel, no curtains, no privacy, the kind of space designed to keep everyone exposed, no corner safe from judgment. Ethan gestured toward a chair at the far end of the long table. His gesture was polite, almost robotic, but the gleam in his eyes betrayed him. He was enjoying this. Vanessa lowered herself into the chair, willing her hands to stop trembling. She was Vanessa Blake. She'd stood in front of sorority panels, judged charity galas, and played hostess to New York's elite. She could handle this. Couldn't she? Ethan took his time. He leaned against the edge of the table, one ankle resting over his knee, his wrist draped casually and strategically to show off the custom watch peeking from under his sleeve. Vanessa recognized the move immediately. It was the kind of power pose she had once perfected, a way to say, "I own this room," without saying a word. "You're here as a junior brand strategist," Ethan said at last, his voice almost conversational. "Do you know why you got the job?" Vanessa forced a smile. "I assume because I'm qualified?" Ethan's smile was razor sharp. "No, you got the job because your resume landed in my hands and I decided it would be educational to have you here." Vanessa's stomach dropped. This wasn't going to be professional. This was personal. "I intend to run this department like a machine," Ethan continued. "We don't have room for weak links, which means you have exactly 2 options: be exceptional or be gone." "I can be exceptional," Vanessa said, fighting to keep her voice even. "I'm here to work, Ethan." His gaze slid down her polished appearance. The designer blouse, the carefully curated accessories, the too tight smile. Work? Interesting concept coming from you. I don't remember you being interested in anything that didn't come with bottle service or a photographer. Vanessa's cheeks flamed. People grow up. Some do, Ethan said. Some don't. The air between them felt pressurized, stretched thin between the past and present. For a moment, neither spoke. Memories hovered like ghosts. Late-night pizza runs, stolen kisses under dorm room blankets, the sting of that drunken party where she laughed him out of her life. Vanessa folded her hands tightly in her lap, nails biting into skin. Look, Ethan, Mr. Cole, whatever you prefer now. I'm not that girl anymore. I need this job, and I'm not here to relive the past. Ethan's smile vanished. Good, because the past isn't the part I'm interested in. He slid a file across the table, the first real assignment. Vanessa snatched it up like a life raft, focusing on the contents, a brand overhaul for a struggling luxury cosmetics line. She could do this. This was her world. Beauty, status, reinvention. As she scanned the brief, Ethan circled the table, moving behind her like a predator mapping its prey. One more thing, he said, voice lower now. Everyone here knows the rules. No personal relationships interfere with professional expectations. Vanessa's head snapped up. There is no personal relationship, not anymore. Ethan leaned down, his mouth close enough to brush her ear. Exactly. The door swung open before Vanessa could respond. A senior executive entered, followed by two junior associates. The meeting was starting, and just like that, Ethan's attention shifted back into CEO mode. Sharp, efficient, untouchable. Vanessa spent the next hour trying to focus, but her mind kept splintering between the present and the past. She took notes, nodded at the right times, kept her face neutral, but beneath the surface she was spiraling. She had faced plenty of challenges in her life, but they were always external. Money troubles, social competition, finding the right shade of lipstick for an event. This was different. This was Ethan. And Ethan knew her weaknesses better than anyone. When the meeting ended, Ethan lingered by the door. As Vanessa gathered her things, he caught her wrist. Just briefly. Just enough. You have until Friday, he said. Impress me. The touch burned long after he let go. As Vanessa rode the elevator down, she stared at her reflection in the mirrored walls. Her mask was already cracking, her makeup flawless, but her confidence slipping. Ethan wasn't just back in her life. He was above her, around her, inside her head. And the worst part? She couldn't decide if she wanted to escape him or earn his approval one last time. The email hit Vanessa's inbox at 7:12 a.m., shattering her already fragile calm. Subject line, urgent, rebrand crisis meeting, mandatory, 8 sharp. She barely had time to breathe before the follow-up came. This one was just a calendar invite from Ethan. No message, no explanation, just the suffocating knowledge that she'd be spending her morning trapped in a room with the man who seemed to delight in her discomfort. She arrived early, hoping to get ahead of the chaos. Instead, Ethan was already there, sleeves rolled up, pacing the room like a caged animal. His usual polished calm was replaced with something sharper, the edge of a man under siege. Sit, he said without looking at her, eyes locked on the phone pressed to his ear. And for once, Vanessa, try to contribute something useful. She swallowed the sting, setting her notebook down and pretending she wasn't shaking. The last 48 hours had been a crash course in corporate survival. Ethan hadn't been cruel exactly, but he'd been relentless. Every piece of work she submitted came back slashed with red notes. Try again. Dig deeper. Is this your best? Each correction felt like a personal reckoning. Now, apparently, things were worse. Do you even know what's happening? Ethan asked, finally tossing his phone onto the table. Vanessa straightened her spine. Something with the cosmetics brand. The rebrand pitch was supposed to go to the client next week. Ethan's laugh was humorless. Supposed to, yes. Except someone leaked early drafts of the campaign to the media, and surprise, surprise, they ran a headline about how Cole Global is trying to redefine luxury by appealing to the broke masses. Our client? Furious. half the board, ready to kill someone. And guess whose team was in charge of those drafts? Her stomach dropped. Mine. Correct. Ethan's eyes locked on hers. Fix it. The room felt too small, the table too wide, the air too heavy with history. But Vanessa forced herself to focus. Do we know who leaked it? We're still investigating, Ethan said, but that doesn't matter to you right now. What matters is rewriting the entire pitch from scratch by tomorrow morning. Vanessa's mouth went dry. That's impossible. It's not, he leaned over the table, palms flat against the glass, unless you're still the girl who quits when things get hard. The jab hit exactly where he meant it to. Vanessa stood so fast her chair scraped loud against the floor. You want to punish me? Fine. But I'm not that girl anymore. And I'm sure as hell not going to let you humiliate me in front of this whole company. Ha! Ethan's eyes narrowed. Then prove it. He slid his laptop across the table. On the screen were the leaked drafts, her drafts, along with angry comments from the client. Off-grand. Insulting. Who approved this mess? Vanessa's pulse pounded in her ears. The work wasn't her best, but it wasn't trash either. Someone had twisted the message, chopped out context, framed it to look far worse than it was. Sabotage? Maybe. But right now, none of that mattered. All that mattered was surviving the next 24 hours. Fine, she said, I'll redo the whole thing. Not alone. Ethan crossed his arms, and for the first time, something almost like reluctance flickered across his face. We're doing this together. Vanessa froze. Excuse me? You heard me. If this fails, it's my reputation on the line too. I'm not leaving it in your hands. You and I are working side by side until this is fixed. The room spun. Being in his orbit for an hour was exhausting enough. A whole day and night together in the same space, breathing the same air, revisiting every scar they'd carved into each other. It was professional torture with a personal twist. But Vanessa didn't argue. She couldn't, not if she wanted to keep this job. And her pride, the hours blurred into a storm of edits, arguments, and silent standoffs. Ethan barked instructions, Vanessa pushed back, and somewhere in the chaos they found a rhythm. Old instincts kicked in, the way they used to brainstorm in college, sprawled on dorm room floors, daring each other to think bigger. At some point, Ethan ordered food. Vanessa barely tasted it. By midnight, they were both glassy-eyed and frayed, but the new pitch was taking shape. It was bold, elegant, everything Vanessa knew it could be if someone just believed in her. Why do you still have this? Vanessa asked suddenly, her voice soft. Ethan's old bracelet, the one she gave him back when they were happy, lay beside his laptop, half hidden under a pile of notes. Ethan's jaw tightened. Doesn't matter. It does. No, his voice was steel again. It really doesn't. The moment passed like a car speeding by on a dark road. Fast, jarring, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. They worked until dawn, and when the final deck was done, Ethan closed his laptop and stood. Get some sleep, he said. You'll need it. Vanessa wanted to say something sharp or soft or honest, but no words came. Instead, she watched him walk out, shoulders stiff, fingers briefly brushing the bracelet before tucking it back into his pocket. She leaned back in her chair, exhausted but strangely alive. There was still history between them, raw, unresolved, but tonight they'd built something together again. Not love, not trust, but something. And for now, that was enough. The boardroom was a battlefield. Sunlight sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows, spotlighting the tension, radiating between Ethan and Vanessa as they prepared to present. Executives filled the room, murmuring, shuffling papers, exchanging knowing glances. Everyone had heard about the leak, and everyone knew who had been put in charge of salvaging the campaign. Vanessa stood at the head of the table, fingers curled tightly around the remote for the presentation screen. Ethan stood beside her, a picture of effortless control, at least on the outside. His tailored suit was sharp as ever, but there was something new in his posture, a stiffness in his shoulders that only Vanessa could read. It wasn't just the company's reputation on the line today, it was his. It was his. Let's begin. Ethan said, his voice cutting cleanly through the room. No greeting, no small talk, pure focus. Vanessa launched into the pitch, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The new campaign gleamed on the screen. Elegant, aspirational, but with a human edge the old draft had lacked. She wove a story, blending product with emotion, selling not just cosmetics, but transformation itself. Reinvention. Power reclaimed. Every word was crafted from long hours, bruised egos, and the buried hope that if they could rebuild this pitch, maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something else too. But halfway through, one of the senior board members leaned forward. "Miss Blake," he said, peering over his glasses, "care to explain how this is so radically different from the drafts your team produced before the leak? It almost feels like two different people wrote it." Vanessa's throat went dry. The question wasn't innocent, it was bait. Before she could respond, Ethan stepped in. "That's because two people did write it. Miss Blake worked directly under my supervision to ensure the campaign reflects both creative innovation and strategic precision." His tone was clipped, protective in a way that made Vanessa's heart stumble. Another executive leaned back, smirking. "Must have been quite the late-night partnership." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Vanessa's cheeks burned, but Ethan didn't blink. "We don't waste time on gossip," he said flatly. "We fix problems. And today, you're seeing the solution." Vanessa glanced at him, startled by the edge in his voice. For all his tormenting, all his cold smirks, Ethan wasn't letting anyone diminish her work, not today. The rest of the pitch rolled out smoothly. Numbers, projections, creative samples, until Vanessa finally exhaled, realizing they'd made it to the end. Applause was polite, reserved, but approving. The campaign had been saved. Ethan had been saved. And Vanessa? She wasn't sure yet. The room cleared slowly, executives drifting out to resume their own power games. Ethan stayed by the window, hands in his pockets, his back to her. Vanessa hesitated before stepping closer. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for stepping in." Ethan's reflections smirked at her in the glass. "I didn't do it for you." Vanessa crossed her arms. "Right, just like you didn't keep the bracelet." His jaw tightened, but he didn't turn around. "What do you want, Vanessa? An apology? A reunion? Or just permission to forget we ever meant something to each other?" She took a breath, the weight of old memories pressing down on her chest. "I want to stop pretending," she said softly. "We hurt each other, both of us. And I can't rewrite that any more than I can rewrite the past week." Ethan finally turned. For a moment the mask slipped, the ambition, the armor, all of it. And there he was, the boy she once knew, the boy who had believed in her before she even believed in herself. "Maybe," Ethan said, voice low, "we stop trying to rewrite and just start over." Vanessa's breath caught. "Start over as what?" Ethan's smirk returned, softer this time. "Let's find out." He walked past her, the brush of his sleeve against her skin enough to send a shiver down her spine. Vanessa stood alone for a moment longer, looking out at the city. The place they'd both changed, both lost themselves, and maybe, just maybe, could find each other again. The only thing she knew for sure was this: neither of them would ever be nobodies again.